Hey, folks, and welcome into another episode of the Longhorn Mailbag. Appreciate you being here with us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Now, the thread with your questions unfortunately got deleted on the board somehow, but I do more or less remember what the questions were, just don't have who asked them, so I apologize for that. But let's get right into it. I remember one of the questions being about Texas in the transfer portal. Who are they looking at? Who are some people to keep an eye on at this point in time? It's an awkward period just because most of these sought after targets are guys who are in the portal because of their head coaches leaving. So schools like Alabama, Washington, Arizona, and ironically enough, those two schools are Washington and Arizona, that is, are the two schools where Texas has some targets or guys to keep an eye on right now. And we'll start with Arizona defensive lineman Tiaoa Savea. Savea 6'4", 305 pounds, and in 2 years at Arizona put up 36 tackles, 7.5 of those for loss, and 1.5 sacks. Now, you can question his production if you want, but the bottom line is right now, Texas needs bodies in the defensive line room. You think they lost their top two dogs in Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Trill Carter enters the transfer portal. DeAndre Robinson asks out of his letter of intent. So you've got Alfred Collins returning, which is a positive. Vernon Broughton's going to be there alongside him. And then after that, you've got a bunch of young, inexperienced players, which you kind of don't necessarily want going into the SEC, which is a conference where it's going to be very physical in the lines of scrimmage. It is arguably, not even arguably, I don't think, it is the most physical at the line of scrimmage. So you want to make that a position of strength like it was this past year for Texas. So right now, maybe Savea is one of those guys. And now, obviously, the connection with Johnny Nansen is there. He was his defensive coordinator over at Arizona, so that certainly gives the Longhorns a leg up. It's just going to probably come down to who the defensive coordinator hire for the Longhorns, defensive line coach hire for the Longhorns is. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But even if they do get Savea, I would expect the Longhorns to continue to look for another body in that defensive line room in the interior of the defensive line just because they need it. They really need it going to the SEC and expect to want experience going to a conference like that. So keep an eye on that maybe in the next portal window as well, would it be expect when I see a move like that happen. And then the other target is Jabbar Muhammad, the corner out of Washington. Had a fantastic year for the Huskies this season. In 600 snaps and coverage, only gave up 2 touchdowns, one of the best defensive backs on the market, and would give a lot to a Texas secondary that struggled at points of the season. Now, Texas has the connections that they certainly need with Muhammad. They've got his cousin, Malik Muhammad, who plays cornerback for the Longhorns, and Muhammad went to high school in DeSoto up by Dallas, a powerhouse high school program up there. But you also have to think that the close to home factor in this recruitment isn't necessarily as much of a large factor or a priority for Muhammad, considering, of course, he went up to Washington to play his college ball. And you take a look at the other two schools that are pushing for his commitment in Alabama and Oregon. Obviously, Alabama losing a lot of pieces, and Oregon could use some help at corner as well. So two schools that certainly need his services, but Texas needs his services too. And that family connection certainly is very important in this recruitment. So keep an eye on this one. Oregon and Alabama very much in this at the end, but so is Texas, and that would be a huge add to the Longhorns secondary. All right, and then the other question that I was asked on the board was, where do things stand with Texas at the defensive line coach hire? Is there candidates, things like that? Now, it's been very quiet, kind of unusually quiet, I think, at this long into the search for it. But I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. And so I can't come to you with any candidates for the position right now, but I'm sure that those are being evaluated and vetted. And I would expect a decision to come sooner rather than later because it is an important spot to fill, especially since it's a position of need. And Bo Davis was a very good recruiter and a good developer for the Longhorns. But it was honestly a bit of concern for me going into junior day when Texas had a plethora of elite products out there and some of those guys being on the defensive line. And when we had the junior day preview on here, I asked Hank and Jordan about, how does Texas combat not having a defensive line coach when they're recruiting defensive line targets? And they said it was going to require a collective effort from guys like Pete Kwiatkowski, Johnny Nansen, and even Steve Sarkisian to try and convince these guys that Texas is the spot to be at their position. And sure enough, one of the two commitments that they get over the weekend was at the defensive line position in four-star defensive lineman Lance Jackson over from Pleasant Grove High School, in Texarkana. So I think that is a huge testament to what this staff was able to do over the weekend, because not only did they get his commitment, but I think they made some good impressions on some other 2025 guys like Floyd Guidry out of Spring High School and 2026 defensive lineman TK Halla, who's a local guy as well. So two very talented defensive tackles there. The Longhorns made good impressions. And I believe Guidry said he considers Texas his favorite. And then Hola, like I said, is a local guy, goes to Bastrop High School, said the Longhorns are trending over there. So you get the commitment. You got two other guys who you would say the Longhorns currently trending, even though they're a little bit far off in this process, I would think. I know Guidry said he would probably announce in the next month or two, 2026 Hola, so there's probably a lot more time with him. But getting a commitment from a guy like Lance Jackson, who could end up being a very valuable piece, and I think already is a very valuable piece in this 2025 class, is a real testament to how good this recruiting staff and coaching staff is on the recruiting front for the Longhorns to be able to land a commitment of that magnitude without a position coach. So nonetheless, still a very important hire to make at that position coach spot, and it's going to affect a lot in the transfer portal and in high school recruiting. But would assume that something like that, like I said earlier, happens sooner rather than later. That's going to do it for us here on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Appreciate you tuning in for another episode of the Longhorn Mailbag. While you're here, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you're the first to know when new content heads your way. For the rest of the crew, I'm Tommy Yarrish. Appreciate you being here with us, and we'll see you next time.